Welcome to Film Court. I am Honorable Beaumont Ambrose. This is the case of People versus Imaginary. In order to remain impartial and protect my identity, my face and voice have been altered. All counsel and parties are present. Let me begin by asking counsel to state their appearances for the record. I'll start with the prosecution.
Mr. Tyler Hayes for the people, Your Honor. Robert Chitz for the defense, Your Honor, and may I say, you look great, Judge. Oh, so that's what we're doing today.
Things work a little differently here in film court. This is a bench trial, meaning there is no jury. I'll be the fact finder and upholder of the cinematic law. The prosecution has the burden of proof, so you will present your findings, and with each charge, the defense will have the opportunity for rebuttal. You'll illustrate these points through evidence such as the screenplay, testimony, and past films. We've all had the chance to review the motion picture in question, but ultimately, I will make the final determination, guilty or not guilty. Here are the accusations that Imaginary is being charged with: excessive length, merchandising gimmick, plagiarism of intellectual property, campy villain portrayal, and wasted potential. Are there any pretrial issues we need to attend to?
Yes, Your Honor, I moved to exclude Jason Blum from the trial. He did not direct this film and has no relevance to it whatsoever. Your Honor, Jason Blum is the Blum in Blumhouse. He is the founder and CEO, so while he did not direct this feature, he provides input on all films produced by Blumhouse. He is absolutely relevant to this trial.
I have to agree. Mr. Chitz, your motion is denied. Mr. Hayes, you may proceed with your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. On March 8th, 2024, Blumhouse Productions released Imaginary. Here is the overview per their website. When Jessica moves back into her childhood home, her youngest stepdaughter Alice develops an eerie attachment to a stuffed bear named Chauncey. Alice starts playing games with Chauncey that begin playful and become increasingly sinister. As Alice's behavior becomes more and more concerning, Jessica intervenes only to realize Chauncey is much more than the stuffed toy she believed him to be. From the summary alone, it sounds to be a promising film, but Imaginary suffers in its execution. Through evidence, I will show you that the scariest thing about this film is that it was made. The core idea, an imaginary friend gone rogue, is one we've seen played out again and again. The Orphanage, The Babadook, Donnie Darko, among others. It's an idea that audiences are familiar with, that is, on the surface, hard to mess up, yet it seems that this film had no issue doing just that. I'll show that the core concept could have worked in a myriad of successful ways. That the bear at the center of the film, Chauncey, was created with the intention to drive merchandise and ticket sales, including their largest live event partnership of the year with Universal at Halloween Horror Nights. Blumhouse plagiarized their own intellectual property by including elements that flew a little too close to the Insidious franchise. Once the villain is finally revealed, it's presented in a manner that's unintentionally humorous or campy in the worst way. And finally, the film sits at 1 hour and 44 minutes, which may not seem long until you see the movie. Your Honor, I ask that you find this film guilty on all counts to prevent future patrons from wasting their hard-earned time and money. Thank you.
Defense, you may proceed with your opening statement.
Childhood is a scary time. There are so many unknowns. It's common for a child to create an imaginary friend to cope with life. That's what my client Blumhouse wanted to dissect and use as the centerpiece of their newest film. I'll show through the evidence that Imaginary is deeper than your everyday horror movie. It deals with complex emotional themes that we usually only see in drama. That no matter the strength of a script, a charismatic lead actor can carry a film on their back. And that playing on inherent fears of childhood sends shivers down the spine, but more than that, it puts butts in the seats. My client has become a pioneer in horror filmmaking with hits like Whiplash, Insidious, Get Out, Megan, most recently Five Nights at Freddy's and Night Swim. They are the go-to horror production house. They have a breadth of work that speaks for itself, and this film fits right in with the Blumhouse library. The prosecution will have you doubting your instincts. But just as the film keeps you on the edge of your seat, you need to stay on your toes. Please keep in mind that nothing is original. The prosecution will paint a picture of imaginary borrowing ideas from past successes. But as you'll see, those past successes belong to my client. The idea is theirs to steal. An audience's familiarity with a concept allows them to ease on into a film in a way that an original idea cannot. Besides, original ideas are far too risky these days, am I right? It's with that, Your Honor, I ask that you find Imaginary not guilty on all charges. The plaintiff got exactly what they paid for. And what they will pay for.
Thank you, counsel. Mr. Hayes, you may proceed with your case.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to start with refreshing the court's recollection on the main characters. This is Jessica, the protagonist. She's an illustrator and writer of children's books. Her notable work is called Molly Millipede. Her husband is named Max, and he has 2 girls with his previous wife. Their names are Taylor, who's 15, and Alice, who's a kid. Another notable character I need to mention is the neighbor, Gloria, who used to babysit Jessica when she was little, although she doesn't remember that at the beginning of the movie. Now let's start with the excessive length charge, shall we? Within the first 30 minutes, nothing much happens at all. I totally understand that there needs to be set up so we can start to get invested in the characters, but there are several scenes that could have been shaved down or eliminated entirely. Moreover, the husband leaves within the first 40 minutes and is absent for the rest of the film. Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Sustained. Mr. Hayes, move on.
Let's talk about specific scenes that could have been eliminated to save time. We're introduced to the cute neighbor who does nothing for the story, yet we spend 5 minutes with him as he's terrorized by Chauncey. This scene subtracts from our fear rather than adds to it. Toward the end of the film, around 1 hour and 6 minutes, Jessica is unraveling her past by tracing over the art she drew on the walls of her childhood bedroom when she was a kid. We know she's figured out that Chauncey was her imaginary friend, so why waste time watching her piece all of this together? Taking a look at Act 3, Jessica, Taylor, and their neighbor Gloria enter the Never After, which is a purgatory realm powered by Alice's imagination. They don't enter this realm until 1 hour and 15 minutes. This is by far the most interesting section of the movie, yet they only spend 27.8% of it in the Never After. This film could have easily been a brisk 90 minutes. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Defense, you may proceed with rebuttal on this charge only.
Thank you, Your Honor. In film, it's true, yes, that it should be as long as it needs to be in order to tell the story. But there are exceptions. What the prosecution conveniently left out was that the scene where Jessica is in her childhood bedroom piecing things together, that scene is spliced together with a scene of the neighbor Gloria giving Taylor extensive exposition on imaginary friends in different cultures. This is meant to show us that 2 important things are happening at once. That way we don't drive ourselves crazy wondering what Jessica is doing while we're with Taylor and Gloria.
Prosecution, you may proceed with your next point.
Thank you, Your Honor. Let's move on to plagiarism of intellectual property. Imaginary is very obviously inspired by the work of another Blumhouse film, Insidious, released in 2011. But it isn't only inspired, it pulls concepts directly from that film. Let's start with their obvious. Both of their names start with I. Both films follow an affected child whose parent went through the same thing when they were a child. The adults of the story don't remember much of their childhoods, which is by design. Both films have purgatory dimensions. Insidious has the further, and Imaginary has the never ever. Josh's father in Insidious was institutionalized, and Jessica's father in Imaginary was also institutionalized. Insidious has a red door, Imaginary has a blue door. These are all general plot points that can be overlooked, but there is one that is so blatant that I must point out to you, Judge. In 2023's Insidious: The Red Door, Dalton paints over the red door in the final act with black paint to seal the passage to the further and ensure the demon cannot escape. In Imaginary, Jessica and the girls use black paint to seal the passage to the Never Ever and ensure the demon cannot escape. Nothing further on this charge, Your Honor.
Rebuttal?
No rebuttal at this time, Your Honor.
Next, Mr. Hayes.
Merchandising gimmick. Blumhouse purposely created a bear that they could sell to make more money outside of the film and provide another backdrop for a maze at Halloween Horror Nights. Last year's maze, The Horrors of Blumhouse, was an underwhelming variety walkthrough featuring various characters from the Blumhouse library, which culminated in a musical number featuring several Megan dolls. Since Blumhouse has a long-standing relationship with Universal, it's possible they were approached to create a character that could easily transfer over to a live event experience. The maze could be placed next to a gift shop that sells various Blumhouse merchandise, including that of Chauncey the Bear. You'll hear Jason Blum testify later that Chauncey joins his horror family alongside Megan and the animatronics from Five Nights at Freddy's, even though he doesn't even hold a candle to those icons.
Rebuttal?
Your Honor, there is no clear evidence to speak to this point. It's pure speculation. It's nonsense.
Mr. Hayes. Next point.
We see Chauncey as a stuffed bear for most of the movie. It isn't until after Alice's appointment with Dr. Soto that it's revealed only Alice and Jessica can see Chauncey. He's not really there. That's right, he's been a figment of their imaginations this entire time. He's actually a demon who has presented himself as a cute, cuddly teddy bear. And when the true form of Chauncey is revealed, it's not only underwhelming, it's under-scary. The bear from Cocaine Bear would have been scarier than the clearly fake, talon-toothed, sad excuse of a villain. It shouldn't make us laugh. It should make us gulp. Your Honor, the charge is not about how much fear the villain can instill in the audience.
It quite literally is. The charge is campy villain portrayal, and the accused is a film intended to be scary. Mr. Hayes, continue.
Furthermore, if the producers wanted to prey on our imaginations, they should have let our minds fill in the blanks for them. 2023's Skinamarink, directed by Kyle Edward Ball, utilizes sound design, darkness, and it draws upon childhood fear. The audience is forced to let their mind create, and in turn, the film is a terrifying experience. If we look at the googly-eyed spirits of the Never Ever as extensions of Chauncey, the camp continues. They were going for Coraline, and what they got was big bulgy bug eyes. They were better off just blacking their eyes out entirely, or whiting them out, making it clear they weren't themselves while remaining menacing. Objection, Your Honor. He's testifying. He has no expertise in film, and it's already out. Changes can't be made.
He's right, Mr. Hayes.
Move to strike all his previous statements.
Settle down, Mr. Chitts. Strike the last two sentences where it shifts into opinion. Was that all for this charge, Mr. Hayes?
No, Your Honor. I'd like to admit this photo into evidence.
Mr. Chitts, any objection?
No, Your Honor. Looks great to me.
Exhibit 724 is admitted.
If we take a look at this photo, it's clear that this is an animatronic. We're kept in the dark on what Chauncey is for most of the film. He easily could have been hidden by the darkness for the rest of it. By showing his true image, it takes all of his power away. He's no longer a towering presence. He's a big, furry, cuddly, robotic bear. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Chitts, your rebuttal.
2001's Donnie Darko follows a troubled teenager and his imaginary friend, a large bunny rabbit. One could argue this bunny rabbit is camp, but it also achieves a level of fear. People take this film very seriously. There's a devoted fan base that is obsessed with this film, in part because of this large bunny rabbit. I argue that Chauncey and Darko Rabbit are one and the same. Yeah, what are you going to say to that?
Thank you, counsel. Mr. Hayes, your final point.
Wasted potential. This film had solid ideas that, if fleshed out, could have been a better movie. Near the end, we finally see a flashback to the night Jessica and her dad's lives were forever changed. The film would have benefited from more flashbacks like this one that connected seamlessly to the present. And it also would have made us more invested in Jessica. Objection, coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Sustained. Move on, Mr. Hayes.
I just know this film had the potential to be greater than it was. It had all the right ingredients and it just fell short. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Rebuttal?
As Mr. Hayes stated, it has all the right ingredients, so I'm failing to see the issue here. The execution was scary, creative, and it leaves the door open for future installments. Sounds like a successful film to me. And it certainly doesn't sound like a film with wasted potential.
Mr. Chitts, is there anything else you'd like to say before we move to closing arguments?
Yes, Your Honor, I'd like to call a witness, Jason Blum. Really, Your Honor? Mr. Chitts was the one at the beginning of this trial who wanted to exclude Jason Blum, and now he wants to call him as a witness?
Mr. Chitts, you may proceed with questioning Mr. Hayes. You'll have the opportunity to cross.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Blum, as producer on Imaginary, can you please talk about how this film fits in with the Blumhouse library?
Iconic characters like Megan and the animatronics of Five Nights at Freddy's have left a lasting impact on the horror genre and on pulp culture. Chauncey's sinister wit and ability to change appearances offers the potential to join their ranks.
Thank you, Mr. Blum. Can you talk a little bit about making childhood experiences scary?
We start with the familiarity of that innocent memory and gradually introduce elements that make it eerie or disturbing. The goal is to create a sense of unease and make the audience question something they once considered safe, turning it into a source of fear and suspense.
Thank you, Mr. Blum. Nothing further, Your Honor. Mr. Blum, have you worked with Jeff Wadlow on previous Blumhouse projects?
This will be the third movie we do with Jeff Wadlow. We previously worked with him on Truth or Dare and Blumhouse's Fantasy Island. I have a lot of trust in his ability, so when he came to us with this idea, we were excited to explore the world.
You mentioned two previous Jeff Wadlow films, so let's take a look at their ratings. Truth or Dare, 16% critical, 23% audience. Fantasy Island, 8% critical, 48% audience. Taking a look at how Imaginary compares as of this trial, 25% critical, 54% audience. With that track record, why did you choose to work with Jeff Wadlow again? Objection, relevance.
Sustained.
Pass the witness. Mr. Blum, I think you'd agree with me that Rotten Tomatoes ratings aren't the end-all, be-all. Have your films done well financially?
Oh yes, definitely.
Do you know the numbers?
Not off the top of my head. Maybe you can remind me.
Allow me a moment while I refresh your recollection. On a budget of $3.5 million, Truth or Dare did $95 million worldwide. Fantasy Island made 6.9 times its budget at $48.5 million worldwide. And as of this trial, Imaginary has made 1.9 times its budget in just a few weeks. I'm not sure about Mr. Hayes, but I see why you'd want to work with Mr. Wadlow again. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Is the state prepared to give its closing?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
May it please the court, counsel. This is a case of quantity over quality. It seems as though Blumhouse has girl-bossed a little too close to the sun. They've become a horror juggernaut, known for low-budget filmmaking that brings big returns. Last year, Blumhouse produced 9 films, with an average critical score of 65% according to Rotten Tomatoes. Their ambition collided with their skill, and in turn, the production quality suffered. Even though the defense will boast about the money these films have made, let's not forget that this court is about the artistic merits of a film. Through the evidence I shared about the unnecessary scenes, I showed that even at 104 minutes, this film is far too long. Scenes that could have been eliminated include Chauncey versus the twink next door and Jessica crazily doodling on her walls while the neighbor gives an exposition dump next door. The defense should be grateful I didn't add that charge to the roster too. I proved that Chauncey the Bear is a cheap gimmick, geared toward merchandising and live event inclusion. Jason Blum testified that Chauncey would be joining the ranks of Megan and the Five Nights at Freddy's characters, implying that he will be merchandised in the future like they have. Blumhouse thought that creating a character that would extend beyond the film would work, since it has worked in the past. But Chauncey is so goofy and unscary, he can't even be placed on the same level. On that note, the googly-eyed doppelgangers and the very obviously animatronic of Chauncey's true form proves that this was an instance of campy villain portrayal. We heard Jason Blum testify about making childhood experiences scary, but where was that creativity in this movie? Evil Dead Rise made cheese graters scary. Even when this movie tries to be scary, it isn't. Instead, they deliberately plagiarized their own material from Insidious. From the otherworldly realms to sealing the demon out with black paint, it is so blatant, it's unacceptable. Self-plagiarism is still plagiarism, and they often share the same consequences. If you write a paper in college, take a few passages from that paper, put it in a new one, submit it, and not cite the source, that's plagiarism. It's unlawful and frankly unethical. Ultimately, this film had some great ideas, but it seems like they were throwing everything at the wall. All the right ingredients, but was undercooked. Let's not forget that the defense attempted to exclude Jason Blum from this trial, then decided to call him as a witness in the 11th hour. What was he trying to hide? What was he trying to prove? Money aside, this film speaks to Blumhouse's credibility. If they continue putting out mediocre horror, people will start to trust them less and less, and that lack of trust will show in the box office numbers. Imaginary takes itself so seriously that it bounces to the wrong side of the scary spectrum. Furthermore, Imaginary isn't full of much imagination. Instead, it relies on familiar ideas, formulaic plot points, and a charismatic lead actor. Imaginary tries so hard to be scary that the only thing scary about this movie is the fact that films like this continue to be made. Your Honor, I ask that you find Imaginary guilty on all charges. Thank you.
Mr. Chitts, you may proceed with your closing statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. It is my job to make sure that the prosecution does his job. And I'm going to do that job today. Let's start with the obvious. In this business, not every movie is going to be a big box office hit. But Blumhouse prides itself on its financials so that when times are slow, those big hits allow them to take risks and have fun. Let's face it, Jeff Wadlow's previous Blumhouse projects weren't received well, but they sure did make a lot of money for the studio. Money that contributed to making big hits like Megan and Five Nights at Freddy's, which the prosecution loves to bring up during this trial. Imaginary may not be a horror masterpiece, but it gives Blumhouse the capital it needs to make bigger and better projects in the future. It's fun, accessible, and easy to watch. The prosecution let you know that Blumhouse produced 9 films last year. Only 2 have been released this year, and only 2 more are planned this year for the fall. 9 films last year, 4 films this year. 9 films last year, 4 films this year. When you hear those numbers, the state's argument about quantity over quality falls apart. It's clear they're putting more energy into their productions this year than last. 104 minutes. Relatively short compared to most movies released today. Most horror movies sit around that 90-minute mark, but because the writers of Imaginary wanted this film to have more emotional depth than most, proper foundation had to be laid. Scenes that the prosecution say are unnecessary speak to the terror of Chauncey. It's a slow build to a big climax. There's no clear evidence of Chauncey being created because of merchandising or live event inclusion. The mazes at this year's Halloween Horror Nights are rumors. Nothing has been confirmed officially. Who knows if Blumhouse will even be involved? Maybe they will be. Maybe they'll celebrate their legacy as they have every right to. Let's talk about the plagiarism. Ideas get recycled in Hollywood all the time. This is no exception. The directors and writers saw what worked in the past and sprinkled in a few ideas that parallel, some other ideas they had before. So what? This industry is all about calculated risk, and sometimes you gotta go with a safe bet. Chauncey is cuddly, sweet, innocent and menacing, scary and violent. When we finally see his true form, it's quite scary. I think you'll agree with me on that. The state went on and on talking about the campiness of the villain, but when has that been a bad thing? Camp can be scary. Since he wants to bring up the Babadook, let's talk about the Babadook. He's camp. He's a gay icon, and he was in one of the scariest movies of the year. It's able to draw you in with that approachability, as the Babadook was released by reading a children's book. And then when it has you in its grip, it snaps you in half. Camp can be scary. When you tear apart and really get into the weeds of a film, every movie is going to have something wrong with it. When the evidence doesn't fit what the prosecution wants it to fit, they must paint a narrative that makes sense. The director Jeff Wadlow wanted to explore childhood trauma and the effects it can have on future generations. Imaginary explores deep emotional themes while dissecting what is so terrifying about childhood. Grab your nightlight and a friend, because watching it alone is unbearable. It's with that, Your Honor, that I ask you find Imaginary not guilty on all charges. Thank you.
Thank you, counsels. I've heard both sides and will take a moment to deliberate. Before I read the verdict, I'd like to make a few comments. Horror takes everything you think you know and flips it on its head. It preys on your vulnerabilities and plays with your mind. Good horror exceeds your expectations and pleasantly surprises you. No matter the verdict, I suggest you take it with a grain of salt and form your own opinion. With that said, let's move to the verdict. In the case of People v. Imaginary, the verdict is as follows. With regard to count 1 as to the offense of excessive length, which is when a film is unnecessarily long or poorly paced, the court finds the defendant not guilty. Count 2, merchandising gimmick, introducing characters or elements solely for the purpose of merchandising or marketing tie-ins without adding meaningful value to the story or thematic elements, not guilty. Count 3, plagiarism of intellectual property, unlawfully appropriating ideas, concepts, or elements from a pre-existing intellectual property without proper attribution or permission, guilty. Count 4, campy villain portrayal, presenting its villain in a manner that is unintentionally humorous or campy, detracting from the intended sense of fear or menace, guilty. Count 5, wasted potential, squandering promising ideas, concepts, or characters without fully exploring their potential, guilty. It is signed this day, 26th of March, 2024, by the Honorable Beaumont Ambrose. Based on the verdict, this film is sentenced to a final judgment of would not recommend. I'd like to thank Mr. Hayes and Mr. Chitts, and we will see you next time on Film Court.